Hello, my name is John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from the capital of Northern BC, Prince George. It's a special podcast in a way because it's number 97. And, a very beautiful day, as you can see in the background, Prince George. It's a beautiful sunny day, a little bit brisk, but it's a beautiful sunny day in Prince George. And for our international viewers, again, if you're planning a holiday this summer, and now is the time to go on holidays, the planes are flying again and all those other things, plan British Columbia, and in particular, northern British Columbia, Prince George and the north. An amazing place, and you must come and see it. I have a special guest today, and his name is Jim Van de Pluch.
Yeah.
And Jim, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, and we know each other a little bit. We met, pre-COVID once.
Yes.
We just bumped into each other. You just said hello to me and talked a little bit about the local things that we are doing. But you've been here for quite a while already, right?
This is my 32nd year in Prince George.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were born elsewhere?
I was born in Burnaby, so I've always been a BC boy.
Yeah.
My parents came over from Holland, and my brother and sister were born in Vancouver, as myself. I was born in Burnaby.
Okay.
And moved
Where
up
were your
here.
parents born in Holland?
They were out of Friesland. Both were out of Friesland, St. Anna-Prachi, Berlicum area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was born in Groningen,
Okay,
so
yes.
if you look at Holland, just for our guest, then looking from my side here, then Holland relatively small, about 19, 20 million people in that area, a lot of people on a small piece of property, and then in the extreme northeast is Groningen, right next to it is Friesland, and then Amsterdam is here somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
So your parents came here when?
It was the mid-50s. My dad came over to, make it a home.
Post-war, right?
It was post-war, and it was hard to find a job back in the Netherlands back then. And Canada, him and his brother, it was a land of opportunity. So they made the move. And the way I understand the story, because he applied everywhere, the day he was getting ready to leave, like the next day he was going to get on the boat and come over, he was offered a job by the Rotterdam Police Department. But it was too late. He had already made the commitment to go to Canada.
Yeah.
So he came to Canada. He worked in mills. He worked all through the Lower Mainland area, worked in Ocean Falls for a while at a mill. He was a skilled craftsman. He was fantastic with a hammer and a piece of wood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not uncommon for people that came out of Holland. A lot of people came out of Holland in the post-war years. I had a couple of aunts and uncles that emigrated to Canada and then ended up in the States someplace. But it was very common at that point that, after the war, and the war was over in 1945, but it took a long time for things to settle down again. And it was a wave of people with Dutch heritage that decided to leave, not so much for themselves, but they were uncertain about the future in Europe, Western Europe in particular, because the fear was then that as the Russians came in and pushed the Germans out of Eastern Germany and through Berlin, and then the Canadians and Americans came the other direction, there was a fear that the Russians would take over most of Europe, and they did, Central Europe in particular, and obviously, and at the same time, potentially that would take in Holland and Belgium and those countries as well. And so there was a fear of that, and that's why a lot of people left Holland. And then there is a very close relationship because your parents and myself, I was born in 1940. Remember the liberation of Holland in my hometown. Just have to have thank you. I remember the time from the liberation, April the 12th, 1945, by the Canadians. It made such an impression on me that I always knew from there and then I would go to Canada. Not if, but when. The land of my heroes.
Yeah.
That's where I wanted to go.
Yeah.
And but I left. The initial wave was of the people between 1945 and 1955-ish.
Yeah.
Was the initial wave. And then I left in 1965 when it slowed down already somewhat, and then the people that then left or emigrated to Canada in particular were of the following generation, more or less.
Yeah.
You know, like with myself, and I ended up in British Columbia as well. You know, so your family then, and you have siblings.
Yep. Yeah, I have an older brother, older sister. We've kind of spread all over. My sister is in Toronto.
Okay.
And married with 4 fantastic kids, and they all have families. I've got great nephews, nieces. And then I have a brother down in California, right in the Ontario, Los Angeles area.
Oh, my goodness.
And well, at the time, when my parents came over, quite a bit of their family went down to California.
Yeah.
And so at one point, and I can't remember, I was very young. Like I don't even know if I was in elementary school yet. You know, we moved down to California for a very short period of time.
Yeah.
My mom didn't really enjoy it very much, so we ended up coming back to BC. It was, I think, too hot for her, too busy. And so my brother actually was at an age where I think he was in high school already at the time, or maybe late elementary school. Just had a real enjoyment of California, and so when he had the opportunity, he moved down.
He went back.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Friesland, where your parents were born and where they lived up to the time that they left, in 1955 or whenever it was, the climate is very similar to the Vancouver or lower mainland climate. So that's where I can see somebody that was born there, they're used to the seasons. Yeah, and they would like that. Yeah,
and there was a whole circle of friends. My mom still is in contact with people that she grew up with.
Yeah,
and she's in her 94.
Wow,
and still is in contact with people that were from the hometown.
Yeah, yeah, and that are now in BC.
Yeah, some are in BC, some in Washington State, and then some still in Holland. It's becoming a smaller group though.
Yeah. The numbers become smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
I still do that too. I still have friends in Holland, and still some family. I'm not too involved in the Dutch community here. Mm-hmm. They did that more from that particular group, either through churches or whatever they had, and I'm kind of agnostic. So, and my wife is Canadian, but I always looked at myself as a Canadian right from the time I was 5 years old. There was no question about it. I was going to go to Canada. I'm a Canadian. That's where I want to be.
Yeah.
So you get your education there, and then what did you do then?
I went straight into working. I worked a lot of retail jobs, and always enjoyed it. I always enjoyed, the
working with the public. Or?
Working with the public was always what I enjoyed doing, and I always enjoyed, selling something. It was always something I really enjoyed. There was always something though that I always felt motivated. I just liked helping people.
Yeah.
The kind of the sales approach that if you just help people, the numbers will work out for themselves, right?
Exactly.
If you have a good product, if you're honest with people, good things happen, right?
Yeah.
And they got to the point where I actually wanted to make a difference, and I was working still retail, and I had a mutual friend that I ran into at CNC. I was taking some accounting classes, and I was my late 30s, and he was talking to me because I was at one of those points where it's like I need to be doing a little bit more, like I need to be doing something different. And he was listening. He said, "Well, what motivates you?" And I says, "Well, I want to help people and I want to make a difference."
Yeah.
And he goes, "Well, you need to do what I'm doing." And at the time, I thought he was actually studying to become a pastor of a church. And I went, "Oh, I can't be doing that."
No.
And he goes, "No, I'm a paramedic." And I went, "Wow." I said, when I was a kid, I was motivated by this TV show called Emergency in the mid-'70s.
Yeah.
I said, that was something I always wanted to do. I just kind of wrote it off that, I wouldn't be good enough or whatever.
Whatever, yeah.
And so he actually invited me to come along that night. He was working that night, and I rode third with him with another individual who I still work with today, Mark Rivard, who is a fantastic guy. And it was a night that kind of changed my life.
All of a sudden, it went boom.
Yeah, I said, I can do this.
Yeah.
And went and got my level 3 ticket. I had no first aid background. I got my level 3 ticket.
But it's for the guests that are watching.
Yeah.
So now, just want to explain what you are. You are, among other things, but a paramedic.
Yes.
And a paramedic is part of the medical service of government that has ambulances and operate throughout British Columbia in all the regions and manning actually the medical cars and vehicles to go to areas where they are required. So tell us a little bit more.
Well, BC is, I think, a really unique and I think is very a lucky province because we do have a provincial service. We're not bound by boundaries. So wherever you are in the province, we're going to get to you.
Yeah.
Whether it be by helicopter, by ambulance,
Yeah.
using a search and rescue team, we're going to find you.
Yeah.
We're going to get to you. So it's on a regular basis, like a Prince George ambulance, our Prince George will be covered with a crew from VanderPloeg or Bear Lake or Quesnel, because we can basically move without borders as long as there's coverage in those communities.
Now, when I came here in 1965, it was not public. It was independent because you had all kinds of cars running around, Cadillacs and all kinds of cars that were the ambulances.
I believe it was 1974 where it became a provincial service.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so we're coming close to our anniversary here. Next year is going to be a big anniversary for us.
Yeah.
And it became, the white vehicle with the red stripe. That has been since 1974. That hasn't changed.
No.
The uniforms changed from a white shirt with a tie to just a white shirt to now the blue shirts.
Yeah.
The license levels have changed over a period of time. And myself, I'm a primary care paramedic. So
what does that mean?
It used to be called basic life support, so BLS paramedic, a basic life support. We also have in our province, we have advanced care paramedics, which is ALS. They have a lot more medical interventions that they can do, especially for cardiac patients, for people that are having respiratory issues. We also then, in Prince George too, we're very fortunate to have critical care paramedics, which are the people that generally work on the plane. And you have
on the planes?
Yeah, so we have a plane and a helicopter based here in Prince George. We have numerous ones throughout the province. And you have to kind of think of that plane as an intensive care in the air.
Yeah.
So for the very sick people that have to move either to specialty treatment.
Either because of an accident or otherwise.
Just medical conditions,
Medical conditions that needs a step up, right?
Yeah. So in these small communities, health concerns don't have boundaries either.
No.
So a small community, somebody could be very sick and need to be at a center like Prince George or maybe even Vancouver, Kelowna. And our critical care paramedics can get there and basically give the same type of care as an intensive care would give and get them to the next level.
Yeah.
And we also have another license level called Infant Transport Team, ITT.
Yeah.
And their specialty, they're based at a children's hospital, and their specialty is pediatrics.
Yeah.
And
what is pediatrics?
Basically 18 years and younger.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, and they have the incubators, they have the babies that are premature, or the very sick kids that need again another higher level of care. And I have such respect for those individuals because the bulk of their patients can't talk.
Yeah.
The size of them, the medications is so critical.
So critical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a great deal of respect for all of my colleagues. Yeah.
So it is I was born during the war years, right? And we saw, as a 5-year-old, saw far too much that we should not have seen, and then all the stress and all the problems you're well aware of the war years. And my mom had 3 kids. My dad was part of the Dutch army, and they didn't know he was part of when the Rotterdam got bombed.
Wow.
They didn't know he was dead or alive for 5 years, so she had to kind of struggle through the war years. And what I'm getting to is that I was affected by PTSD, and you know, and that's very much also a reality with those that serve the people, and either police or related services like paramedics or ambulance services, that you get exposed to some very trying situations, and mental health and stability is very much part of the profession.
Oh, very much so. I personally was off for 10 months with a diagnosis of PTSD.
Yeah.
And at the time, it really, not only what I was going through because of the calls that I had attended, it was also, I would almost like a guilt factor, because it was like I signed up to be a paramedic. You know, this is what my job was. That the fact that I let the job get to me really bothered me. You know, I had a series of, you know, a string of really bad calls in a very short period of time. I was overworking. I was working a lot. I was exhausted.
More time, and that is again a reflection of not enough people in the profession, and then having to do too much OT or overtime.
Yep.
And how does it manifest itself then, like in a situation like you, but that's common in different forms with a lot of other people for the same reason? I just want people to understand that a little bit better.
There was an old school mentality, whereas in order to forget the bad call, give me another call.
Yeah.
If I just keep going, I won't have to think about the old call.
Yeah.
And our culture has changed. When I got back to work, I kind of made a personal vow that I was going to be better for my patients, but I was also going to be better for my colleagues.
Right.
And I joined what we have now called a critical incident support team, a peer team.
Yeah.
And we're basically activated for a number of different reasons. Sometimes it's just dispatch will activate us because it's a bad call. And we'll reach out to our colleagues throughout the province. It's generally, we try to be anonymous, so they don't know who we are.
Yeah.
And we just check in. Just to make sure that they're doing okay, that what they're feeling is normal. And if they need extra support, we have an incredible team of clinicians that we have access to now.
Yeah.
That
provincially.
Provincially.
Yeah.
And again, because of COVID, it used to be a lot of face-to-face, but we're finding that Zoom and Skype and all these different platforms.
Technology, right, has helped to make it work more effective and efficient, right?
Yeah. So there was no stop in care. So, I'm very proud of the work that my peers do. There's, I think, 150 of us now in the province that are. We get a little bit of additional training. We're not counselors, but we're just colleagues, just like the people we're contacting. Yeah. And we just check in and make sure that they're doing okay. Yeah. And, a lot of times they're doing fine. They appreciate the check-in, but sometimes they just need a little extra. Sometimes it's just talking for a while. Yeah. Sometimes it is going to a professional.
It's a recognition, overdue in a way, but not only to paramedics, but also I did some podcasting with some people from the RCMP. Not unsimilar in a lot of cases. That I believe that public at large has become more sensitive to the occasions of PTSD in particular, and then the other part that has been a portion of it likely is, and not over belaboring this, but there's shortages of paramedics, and then part of that was they've been in negotiations on contracts, which fortunately are settled now without going into the details.
Yeah.
But likely what will happen is it will attract more people into the profession. And in particular, where you're dealing with situations, I cannot imagine what it would be other than I was trained special forces in the Air Force in Holland, and I was drafted for 2 years. So we then got exposure to things that happen more so than the average individual would see. But what would happen is that you never quite know what the next phone call will bring, and then how ready are you for it, and what the situation. So it's always a form of stress that will happen, I presume.
Oh, for sure. You have to trade your mind to, like, I read this book. It was called The 60-Second Medic. And the basic premise is if you go into every call thinking it's the worst thing you're ever going to see, you get that adrenaline level at the right level to respond appropriately, to be able to keep your emotions in check, be calm. We have a lot of cliches. No one ever calls us because they're having a good day.
No.
So we're there, and a lot of what we do is what we consider very routine.
Yeah.
But for the person who's calling, it's a terrible thing.
Exactly.
So not always the medicine that we can provide, but it's a lot of times just the bedside manner.
Yeah.
How many people don't feel they're being heard anymore, but just, listening to what's going on and trying to discern really what the problem is, and, getting them that level of care. And again, I think I can only speak for Prince George, but our emergency department is phenomenal.
Yeah.
I've worked over the years with a variety of different doctors and a variety of different nurses, but each and every one of them has been phenomenal. And through the pandemic, what really impacted me is like all the other people that just played such an important part, like the people that kept the rooms clean.
Yeah.
The cleaning staff, what an exceptional job they did.
Yeah.
The administrative staff, making sure that all the right things got to the right places.
Exactly.
All
the things that we don't see and take for granted, right?
Yeah, really, when I hear someone complain about a situation that happened in the hospital, it bothers me, because I see how hard the people there work and what a great job they do.
Yeah, and it's usually not understanding it or knowing it, right?
There's always more layers to the onion, right?
Exactly.
That people don't always understand.
Exactly.
But again, you're there because you're having a bad day and you want help. Yeah.
Now, talking a little bit about paramedics.
Yes.
So you've been doing that now in this region for how long?
22 years.
22 years.
Yeah.
And then describe a little bit, like, now you're a paramedic, and you work for X amount of days and hours. So what does that all kind of look like?
My normal shift pattern, and we have a lot of different shift patterns, but my particular one is 2 days and 2 nights. They're 12-hour shifts.
Yeah.
We go from 6 to 6.
Yeah.
And I work with generally a regular partner, and
the partner is the team member in the car.
Yeah.
Right?
So then we alternate. One shift you'll drive, the next shift you'll attend. And,
okay.
And that way you sort of balance everything out. And, and I work with a variety of different people. Like, again, we have advanced care paramedics that I particularly work with on a regular basis.
And you're parked by the hospital.
Yes.
is the building, right?
Yeah, my particular station is the one right across from the hospital.
Yeah.
And personally, I chose one of the busier ambulances because the shifts go by quicker.
Right.
And it's just the variety of different things that,
So you sit there and then the phone rings.
Yep, or pagers go. We carry pagers again.
Yeah.
We've gone back to that, and it's worked out well. And so you show up, and the page goes off or the phone rings, and we have a little computer in our cab there that whatever the call taker has gotten for information is generally there.
you're talking to 911 or to an operator of some sort?
Well,
or?
when someone calls in, they call 911 and then
Right.
they get sent to a dispatch center. A call taker will take the call. The call taker will send it to a dispatcher.
Yeah.
And then the dispatcher sends it to the available crew.
Right. And the available crew, now the call will come in and saying, okay, what's the problem? Well, my husband is having a heart attack. Mm-hmm. Does that then take a special person again that goes?
Yeah, that actually would trigger a layered call. So you get a advanced care paramedic team.
Okay.
You'd get a basic life or primary care paramedic team. And depending on location, there would generally be a fire response as well.
Okay.
So
you see, that's another thing that interesting that we talk about.
Yeah.
Because, because a lot of times now, what I see, that wasn't always that way, right? I've been here for nearly 60 years, and it started out with the cars, and there were ambulances, and then obviously, and I forget now that I think you said 1974 or so, or 76. The ambulances came in, and then more later, all the fire engines or a number of fire engines attend as well, or being dispatched by the same dispatch?
Not by the same dispatch. So again, there's more to it. A call would come in and it generally would go to a call center, and I believe they ask, do you need police, fire, ambulance?
Okay.
And a lot of times people will know specifically, or sometimes people will just start talking, and it's up to that call taker to discern who needs to get that call first. And so let's say we get the call and it looks like it's going to be something like maybe a cardiac arrest or something like that, where the more hands the better. Then fire will be dispatched as well.
Okay.
And whoever gets there first starts the treatment.
Yeah.
And again, it becomes a team approach, and that's something too that has worked incredibly well. Like, I do really admire the partners that we have in town. Our RCMP are fantastic to work with.
Yeah.
Prince George Fire Rescue are fantastic to work with.
Yeah.
And again, once we leave the city limits, we work with a lot of the volunteer fire departments. And we talked about earlier, about that PTSD. My heart always goes out to the volunteers.
Yeah.
These are people in their communities. They're just trying to make their community a little bit better.
Yeah.
And a lot of times they're going to their neighbor.
Yeah.
And there's been quite a few times where we've gone and the volunteer fire department is already working. Yeah. And it is someone that's very well known to them. Yeah. Or it could be a family member.
Or stabilizing, helping.
Yeah. So, I think they're always sort of the forgotten heroes, because they are the ones that are giving back to their community in such a huge way. And I guess there's a camaraderie with being part of a volunteer fire department. I hear that all the time. Yeah. But, there's a lot of exceptional people that we get to interact with on a daily basis.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And then, you got bad car accidents happening, and that can be very traumatic as well, right?
Yeah, and then there's highway rescue. Again, another team of volunteers here in Prince George that once it's outside the city limits where Prince George Fire has their boundaries, we rely on those volunteer fire departments again, the highway rescue, to sometimes cut open a vehicle so we can get at our patient. Yeah. We, again, on an ambulance...
Is that again volunteers that are involved?
Most of those are volunteer. I believe everyone in highway rescue is a volunteer. Yeah. And again, there's always good Samaritans that stop, and I don't...
See, and a lot of people don't know about that. I knew that it was to a certain extent, but the extent of it we fully don't understand. And I think that's good for you to talk about it. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of pieces to the puzzle. There's a lot of wheels in that machine that make it work. And when it works great.
Now, the other thing that has been of real concern to the community is that, the effects of drugs in particular on young people, but other people, all the deaths because of that. And the city is not spared by that, but that must be very, very hard to deal with too, right?
Oh, definitely, because up until 5-6 years ago, we've never seen the numbers that we were seeing now. No. I think of over the years, there's a drug that we administer called Narcan. Yeah. That is it will reverse what the opiates are doing in the system.
Yeah.
And I can't speak for my colleagues, but it was very rare to have to drop Narcan. We went to very, very few overdoses.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it was like a switch went off.
Yeah.
And suddenly, like there for a while there, like a few of my colleagues were having pre-drawn Narcan and keep it in their pocket because we were injecting it so much.
Yeah.
And it's rarely does a shift go by where you don't drop Narcan once or twice.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing, and again, these are observations, is that, the people that are using are generally with people that have the Narcan kits, and when somebody goes down there, by the time we get there, they've already been given bystander Narcan.
Yeah.
Sometimes 2 or 3 times before we get there.
Yeah.
So,
which is a lifesaver, right?
it is, for
There's
sure.
only so much time
Yeah.
to where Narcan will reverse.
Well, what the opiates are doing in your system, they're stopping your respiratory system.
Okay.
So it's stopping your ability to breathe,
Okay.
to keep it really simple.
Yeah.
And so what Narcan does is that reverses that,
Right.
but still, giving them oxygen, getting them, helping them breathe is really the life-saving thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, again, the streets of Prince George, again, there's another group of people that have really impressed me lately. There's a lot of people working at the needle exchanges and at a lot of the shelters that are having to give a lot of Narcan, assist a lot of people.
Yeah.
And, they're doing an exceptional job as well.
Yeah. But the frequency of this occurring is more and more and more all the time, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Which is troubling.
And it's not just a bigger city. Like
No.
I work on a committee that deals with stations throughout the province, and the opiate situation is not a big city problem. It's a small city. And again, I don't know the answers. Did it just become more accessible? Did it become something that people leaned on a lot more? I haven't really ever researched what started the sort of the abundance of it. Is it just so inexpensive and so accessible, or is it that people are using this as an escape? I remember when I first
escaping reality.
when I first started with BC Ambulance, and again, I grew up with loving parents and a wonderful home, and like my wife and my kids. I have I had a very stable, normal, fantastic.
Yeah.
And I suddenly took this job on, and I was exposed to something that I never knew existed.
No.
I thought was a TV show type
Whole
stuff.
different world. Yeah.
Yeah, and when I saw the amount that alcohol affected people. I remember one of my very first training shifts. We did 10 calls. 9 of them were alcohol related. And that was, to me, like when I joined the ambulance, I thought, I'm going to be there for heart attacks and broken legs,
Exactly.
car accidents, that's going to be my role in society.
Yeah.
And it's
not so
at all. And, there's a lot of people struggling. And I was working, and I've been very fortunate that when I started, I worked with an exceptional group of people that, I learned a lot from. And I remember one saying that if you had their reality, would you want to be sober? And I, thought about that, and I just go, that it really opened up, a level of compassion and empathy for what people are going through.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is their reality.
Yeah.
And there's not a simple solution. There's not if you only stop that, life would be better.
Yeah. No,
it's not that simple.
It's not that simple.
Yeah.
Now, the other thing, that has been from a general public perspective, and we touched on that a little bit already, as to, I have a lumber mill and a number of other operations. One of our key problems, not only us, but many other mills or companies or government for that matter, or the CN or the airlines, shortage of skilled employees is a critical part. Not an exception for the ambulance services or paramedics. Hopefully, to attract more new candidates, is that changing the contract and making it more attractive, hopefully will help to a certain extent. Has this been a big issue to the ambulance service regionally and BC?
You know, again, I don't have any numbers to back this up. These are observations. But yeah, we had a very unusual system as far as like even getting a full-time job. You know, you had to go to Vancouver for the longest. There was the only place you could go full-time. You know, a lot has changed for BC Ambulance in so many different ways over the last, let's say, I want to say it started even pre-COVID. But, you know, the way that, you know, the medications that we can give, the treatments that we can give, the equipment that we're working with. But there's now full-time positions in small communities that allow people to have some normality to their life. Like when someone was part-time, you never knew month to month what your schedule was going to be like. You know, there were times when we did have an abundance of workers and there were no shifts. So you had to end up going into maybe first aid jobs up in the oil patch or whatever. But that has changed. Like, again, because of shortage, there are, you know, it's kind of a standing joke. If you want to work, there's a position for you somewhere. You know, there's an open ambulance somewhere that you'll be able to work. So that has, that's changed. But I think, you know, having full-time positions in not just Prince George, but in these other communities has just made it so people can think of it as a career. And I think just even from the scope of what they're allowing us to do, what medications they're adding, the treatments that we can offer, it's hard not to feel good about being a paramedic now.
Now, the other thing, Jim, has been, and I was involved in this quite a number of years ago, is that Northern BC is so huge, and especially for people watching this from Europe in particular. You know, here we're sitting in Prince George, British Columbia, you know, and then saying Vancouver is 800 kilometers south of us, and then 800 kilometers north of us is the Yukon border. That's the size of British Columbia, and the same from east to west. We are in the center, so it's huge. And by size, most of the population is close to the border with the United States or on the island, in particular the southern part of the island. What I found here, and I don't know if they are doing, you refer to helicopters, but I always thought that you know, we should you know, have more helicopter services that take us out to those places that are hard to get to by car. And you were referring that the ambulance service has helicopter service here as well?
We've added there's always been one in Kamloops, my understanding. There's one in Prince Rupert. We have one now in Prince George, and it is a dedicated medical helicopter. Set up for stretchers, set up with the proper equipment, and dedicated to respond to ambulance calls.
And I didn't know. Is that at the airport then?
It's at the airport, It's painted like an ambulance. It's...
I haven't even seen that. Where is it parked?
It's over on the anti-air side hangar. So
is it in the hangar then?
It's in the hangar until
because I'm there. I go back and forth all the time to the airport.
Well, if you'd like a tour one day,
I like that.
I would be more than happy to bring you up there.
I want to do that, and then take a picture of it and then post it as well. Because you know that. So that is always on call.
Yes, and manned with again either critical care or basic life support paramedics or primary care paramedics.
That is great.
Again, you know, weather is always going to be an issue flying helicopters in our area, but. And again, we have the dedicated plane. We actually have 2 planes dedicated to Prince George. You know, again, being a provincial service, you talk about the remoteness. We have stations in the Fort Nelsons, the Atlans, the Hudson Hopes, you know, the Dees Lakes and
Telegraph Creek or wherever, Telqua or you know, and all over the place, right?
So again, you know, if there is a response that's needed. And we partner again with search and rescue teams, with the Canadian Forces search and rescue teams. Like we'll get to you.
So what I'm hearing from you, what I'm seeing, And I've known there have been some struggles in terms of, getting through the contract negotiations. Those are now behind us. That all looks well for what I've always felt, what I've seen, and how we have been exposed to it. Obviously, I'm running lumber mills and doing all the kind of things like that, and have had exposure to, ambulance service when required, or when I was close to areas where they were required, or police or the fire department, and all of those have, be very fortunate as a province, and how well those services work here.
Yeah, again, there's always improvements that can always be made. It's always evolving, but I think the citizens of BC should be very proud of the ambulance service, and and I'm very proud of the work that my colleagues do day in, day out, and every night, and
So you've been doing this now for 22 years, and doing this for a lot longer from here on in, or what is your
No, I still have a few more years before retirement is going to happen, but I still enjoy going to work. I work, like I said, I've got a great partner right now. His name's Roger Boer, another Dutch guy.
Yeah,
and,
interesting.
And I work with some great advanced care paramedics. Jesse and Stefan. They're there, and the people I work around me are excellent guys and ladies, and we try to be positive about what's going on, and we try to help. Again, our job can be sometimes just be nice to people. Just be kind. Like I said, sometimes just listening is all they need.
But you can be anything when required. You have all the tools to deal with any set of circumstances, and you have the people to do the best that is possible, available, if things happen.
That's right.
Other thing that I want to talk about with you a little bit is the relay of life. You were quite involved in that.
Well, I've always, from actually an early age, or right out of high school, I've always been about volunteering.
Yeah.
And the Relay for Life was very near and dear to my heart. And it sort of stemmed out of my dad passing away. My dad passed away from cancer, and he was down in the Lower Mainland. We were visiting a cancer clinic, and we were met by a guy at the door, and he was dressed like a doorman. He had the big thing on, and again, we did not expect it to be a positive outcome, and we were all pretty sad. We were there hoping for some kind of miracle.
Yeah.
And we had this guy greet us at the door, and he had this big smile on his face, and he was super friendly. And at the time, I was really annoyed by him, because I'm going, this is sad. This is not happy times. Like, you jerk being so happy.
Yeah.
And after my dad did pass away, and I had some time, I kept thinking about that guy. And he actually had an impact. Like, he was making it positive in a bad situation.
Yeah.
So I felt a little motivated that I wanted to help. So I actually went by our local Cancer Society office, and at the time Steve Horton was the manager. And I says, hey, I'd like to do something. I don't know what you need, but I'd like to do something. And he says, well, we always need help with fundraising. And he says, let's brainstorm.
Yeah.
And Steve's a really dynamic guy. You might know in town here, Dave Horton. It's Dave Horton's dad, Steve Horton. And we had talked at one time, I was an avid cyclist at the time, that we were going to do this bike ride around Prince George.
Yeah.
But we approached the RCMP, and they said, logistically, our roads aren't set up. We can shut down roads and make that happen. So we had heard that Coquitlam did a 12-hour relay.
Yeah.
And being competitive people, we said, well, we have to one-up them. Let's do 24 hours.
Yeah.
In that first year, we had a small team of volunteers.
That's how it all started.
Yeah. And we had a small team of volunteers, and we had a lot of support from the the Scouts.
Yeah.
And their leaders, and they were our main volunteers those first few years. They did security, they did cleanup, they did everything for us. And I think we had 90 people sign up, and I think there were 6 teams with a total of 90 people.
Wow.
And that first year, there was a lot of things that impacted me about the first year. The first midnight vigil, we still had it at midnight. And it was really moving. It gave people a chance to grieve that had lost somebody, and it gave a chance for people to celebrate the people that had beat cancer.
Exactly.
But we were sitting there up on a hill at about 2 a.m, and there was 6 people walking around the track. And it just really impacted me that it was something special.
Yeah.
And, over the years, more people got excited by it, more people heard about it. And I think it was like year 5, it became this city, this city inside itself, this big monster of an event. And we kind of joked that they were spending more on t-shirts than we even made that first year.
Yeah.
And I took sort of more of a backseat role and just kind of went to the event, and whatever it was, cleanup or whatever, just kind of helped out, but always tried to stay connected to it.
Yeah.
And it was just incredible, what this event had become, and it became a staple of Prince George.
Yeah.
So the recent news about it being shut down was...
Why was it shut down?
All I know is from what I've read in the newspaper stories, it was a corporate decision that they shut down quite a few of them, and I think administratively it was too tough to do. And I think what I talk about, like not being able to get skilled workers or workers in general, getting people to volunteer. Like it's a big event that needs a lot of people to make it run successfully, and I think just getting people to volunteer, whether it's still after effect of COVID or it's a different mindset that we're in right now. But even events we do with BC Aimants, we do an annual food drive called the Red and White Hunger Fight, which has become St. Vincent de Paul's, from what I understand, their biggest food drive. They depend on us. This is the first year we weren't able to do it, because we could not get enough volunteers to actually man the ambulances and collect the groceries. And that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, because could it not be that saying likely it's the after effect of COVID, that people are not quite back on the circuit that they should be, and that maybe there has to be a pause so that it still can continue at some point?
Volunteerism, and I know you do a lot in our community, and you're involved in a lot of different events. When you're at your events, you probably see the same people event to event to event. It seems like it's that real 80-20 rule has even gotten more of a 90-10 rule. 90% of the work is being done by 10% instead of that old 80-20. It's the same people that keep stepping up and doing the work. And I've been thinking a lot about how with my colleagues, because I don't think they understand the benefits. Like when you volunteer at something like a food drive, like you mentioned earlier, we go to events where people are generally at their worst or they're having that really bad day. When you're at a volunteer event, you get people that are patting you on the back and shaking your hand and thanking you for what you do. It's a win-win. Like not only are you collecting food and helping a food bank, Save On loves us because they see a big bump in sales, but from a morale standpoint and from anytime I've done any kind
people
of...
feel good, right?
Yeah, anytime I've done anything extracurricular in the community, you generally can't help but leave feeling a lot better about your community, about yourself, about people that you work with.
I find it sometimes, Jim, for me at least, is part of the culture. That's what we did when I was in Holland, so I'm not saying anything positive, negative about it, but for me, it's not something that I do because I have an agenda, but I feel that being part of the community means, giving back wherever you can. Doesn't mean it has to be a lot other than maybe just time, brings the community together and for everybody. And that's really the whole fabric of what makes a community. And every so often we see that happens here as well. I'm particularly thinking back on, I think it was 2018-19 when the big fires were there, and all the people from around here came and were all accommodated in Prince George, and Prince George took on a leadership role, and so did the people, and that was exemplary in my opinion, and showed what can be done, and and it becomes a way of life, saying that's part of our culture.
Well, I remember something that my dad said when my dad was in the hospital. We were sitting there, and there were people coming to visit, and it was people from his church that he knew, but let's say weren't close friends or anything like that. And these people kept coming by. I go, Dad, I didn't know that you knew him well. And he said something to me. He says, well, when things are tough, people step up.
Yeah.
Like he said, you're right. These aren't people that I would talk to on a daily basis, but they know that I'm in the hospital now, and they come and visit. Yeah. And that simple sentence really impacted me.
Yeah, no question. Yeah. And that's kind of what shows, that the importance of that, of being part of the culture, of the stepping up when the opportunity presents itself, and that at the end of the day makes the community.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I know that you've done, because again, that's, I think, when I first met you, is actually I went up to you just to say how much I admired the work that you were doing, and to say thank you as a community member. Yeah. Because I had saw your name, working with this, and you'd work with this group and that group. Yeah. And I know the list goes on and on. Yeah. And I was just really impressed, because as a business person, you could literally sit in your executive office and put your feet up, but you didn't. And I was very impressed by that.
Yeah, it's the background. That's the culture. So important for the community.
I've mentioned my dad a few times, but we had a lot of seniors in our church, and there was a few times, and again, at the time that I was at that age, I hated it, but my dad would drag me out on a Saturday. Yeah. He would get that person out of the house, and he would fix a fence, just because he knew they couldn't do it, and he had those skills. So, again, those kind of things really impacted me.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, the other thing that I want to talk to you about a little bit is the IRS supplies. What does that stand for?
Well, it's IRL supplies.
IRL. Yeah.
Well, it's actually my father-in-law's. It was my father-in-law's business. It's now my brother-in-law's business. It's Industrial Reproductions Limited, which is actually very close to Brink Forest Products. Yeah. And that's actually what got me to Prince George. Is I was down in Vancouver. That's where I had met my wife, and her dad owned IRL Supplies, and
it's on the other side of the bridge.
Yeah, and it's an industrial supplier to the forest industry and the mining industry.
It's a big company.
It's become, for being a standalone Prince George business, which now has a location in Saskatchewan as well.
It's been around for a long time.
Yeah, 52 I think was when it was originally started by a few of the people from IFS. Yeah, Harry Gairns I think was one of the people involved.
Industrial Forest Service. Yeah, it's now Rob Schutz is the CEO.
Yeah, so it's it's again a place that's all about quality and about customer service, and they do a good job, and have got a long time people. I was there for 30 years before I left to just do ambulance full time. I kind of combined the two for quite a while. Yeah. And I was with IRL for a long time there.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I developed a lot of friendships with a lot of customers, a lot of people in the industry, and it's interesting. At the time, we were, again, you really watch the economy as things, especially in the forest industry, were up and down. So did the business. Yeah. And now being in a business that, seems to be unaffected by the economy, people get sick no matter what's happening with the price of lumber. Yeah.
It's just like a roller coaster, right?
I've always tried to stay busy. Like, I also do a lot of, freelance photography. I've been with the CN Center for close to 25 years as their event photographer.
Yeah, and that's another thing I was going to ask you about. Being a photographer has been very much part of your life too.
That was always the hobby that I loved, the passion. I loved everything about cameras. I loved the hardware, the shooting the images, looking at other people's pictures. It was, photography is sort of the happy place for me. And when I had the opportunity, I first actually connected with the Cougars. When the Prince George Cougars first came to town, I kind of was a bit of a pain to them. I kept phoning up saying, hey, come on, let me take pictures, let me take pictures.
Yeah.
Eventually they finally relented and said, okay, you get 2 rolls of film, this
Go
back in
for it.
film,
Yeah.
you know, try to impress us.
Yeah.
And that was still in their Coliseum days before they moved over to, at the time, the multiplex or the CN Center. And I lucked out. You know, I got a bunch of images that they really liked right off the bat. So they said, hey, do you want to work with us?
Yeah.
And at the time, it was great. You know, got to get into all the hockey games and shoot hockey. And, you know, my kids were small. They got to meet the players and hang out with you know, it was a great experience. And then that led to, you know, shooting the concerts and the other shows. And I've worked with Glenn Mickelson for, I think it's close to 22, 23 years with him as well. And you know, I've got to see some incredible entertainment up close and personal, and you know, been backstage for a couple of the meet and greets and got to meet a few of the people. And
it makes your life so interesting, right? Because you got your career, you had your engagement with IRL, obviously, you know, for many years, and then still the career as a paramedic.
Got to keep it interesting, right?
Yeah. So the other thing that I did is that, and we talked about it a little bit, is I wrote this book. Now, which is somewhat amazing because I'm not naturally a writer, or I was not overly academically successful. I failed grade 3, and then I failed grade 7 3 times, and then I got a job at 14 and as a furniture maker. And then when I came to Canada, I wanted to always come to Canada, and then the other part that I wanted to do is build my own lumber mill. And then the other reason that I came here is to prove that I can do it, and that I have what it takes. And I left Amsterdam with $150, and when I came off the bus here, I had $25.47.
Yeah.
But what I did have is attitude, passion, and work ethic, which means success. And you know, it's always been very much part of it. I'm writing another book that will kind of fit in what you are talking about. It is finding your passion, living the dream. And that's about people. So many people are doing things, they said, I don't like what I'm doing, and I hate my job, because that will affect everything around them. And I say change. And so that book is coming out in this July.
Oh, looking forward to it.
I'll get you a copy of it.
Oh, I appreciate that.
In the meantime, this one here is also against all odds. It took me 80 years to live it, 20 years to think about it, 2 years to write it. And it's not about hurrah, hurrah, how successful John is, but it's more about, in spite of it all, you know, the PTSD in a child, fear of losing your parent, the only one that you had during the war, that you know, was with me for a long time until I got counseling for it in my 50s, you know, and you know, and then you know, and then obviously restarting my career. And then the other part is the ADHD unlocked. It was not until I was 57 that I walked into a bookstore here and I looked at this one book. I don't know why I looked at it. It was the title of the book was Driven to Distraction.
Okay.
And it was about ADHD. And I said, oh my God, that's me. And I took the book and I wrote in it in Dutch. Now I finally know who I am. And then it took me another 5 years before I talked to my doctor about it. It was my personal friend. You know, and one day I came into his office. It was 5 years later. I was already in my early 60s. And he said, hey, John, why are you here? I said, I think I got ADHD. And then we kind of explored it, and yes, I did. And then it took me another number of years until I thought, I'm going to write a book about that. And that's what this one is. Quite successful.
Good.
So I'm going to sign those for you.
Well, thank you.
And then the other one is finding your passion, living the dream, is extremely important to a lot of people. I believe, and that will come out in July. And I'll get you a copy of that as well.
No, I appreciate that. I'm looking forward to it.
And the one with ADHD, actually, one of my best friends is Dr. Tracy Lotz.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with her.
Yep.
But a very well-known medical doctor and an emergency surgeon. ADHD. You know, so in this book on ADHD, we interview about 12 different people that are blessed by it. I call it's not a liability. I believe it's a superpower. I couldn't have done what I did unless I have ADHD. Highly misunderstood in my opinion, although the stigma is starting to disappear from it. I hope, at least in a small way, I'm helping that process.
Yeah.
And I call it a superpower. And there is not a day that goes by, Jim, that I don't hear from somebody that says, I got it too. And or my kids, or this or that. I interviewed, I think, earlier this week, a fellow that both him and his wife have it. And, you know, ADHD. And, you know, so what I say is this particular book, especially for anybody, because it is virtually the frequency of occurrence much higher than people initially thought it would be, and that it is virtually unavoidable, that you will find in your circle, your friends, your family, or you will encounter ADHD, and to understand it makes it more easily understood by some people are a little bit different in being ADHD people, and that's why I wrote it. You know.
Oh, excellent! Thank you.
But there are people that are not only ADHD, but also the ones that are affected by trauma, or by, you know, First Nations comes to mind, and are slow learners. You know, and you know that you know can kind of look at this, and then it also deals with the issue of training. Everybody's not suited to sit 4 years, 5 years in a classroom and take in all the stuff that you're feeding them, but more focusing on the core issues.
Yeah.
Which addresses the learning process that I believe needs an overhaul.
Well, you touch on something, like I've got 4 kids, and each one is their own unique person.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it's the exact same way, is that everybody sort of does have their own, you know, everyone's going to address something a little bit different.
Exactly.
You know, we talked briefly about, you know, mental health issues, right?
Yeah.
Everybody thinks about a situation a little differently. Like when you have the flu, there's commonalities.
Yeah.
You know, you got the fever, you're going to be coughing, you know, there's a commonality. But with mental health issues or anything like that, everyone is going to process it, deal with it slightly differently.
And we're recognizing it more as a reality. It's not anymore something that we really don't want to talk about. It is more open out there, same with ADHD, and that's a good thing.
Yeah.
You know, and to say, okay, then how do we incorporate that into our lives, you know, and how do we deal with it more effectively by understanding it? And I, in my little way, at least, hope to contribute to that as well.
Excellent.
Jim, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, it was.
Thank you for your service.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and if there is an opportunity at some point, then give me a call, and then I want to see the helicopter, and then maybe also see you in uniform then.
Okay.
And then take some pictures, and then you know, at least gives you an opportunity to give me a look. The same, I would like to see the facility across from the hospital.
Yeah.
So
I'd be honored to actually give you a tour through that.
I would like that.
Yeah, and I'll actually get one of my bosses to join us. And,
and I would like that as well.
Yeah.
You know, and then kind of go from there.
Excellent.
Again, thanks, Jim.
Thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Thanks.